Hello friends, welcome to a new lecture. Today in this lecture I would like to discuss about the pelvic cavity. In the last class we have learned about the pelvic inlet. Now what is pelvic cavity? It is a cavity is a segment which is bound above by the pelvic inlet and below by the plane of least dimensions. So this segment is called as pelvic cavity. So it is bound above by pelvic inlet and below by plane of least pelvic dimensions. Okay, this segment is called as pelvic cavity. Right, now what is the shape of the pelvic cavity? Pelvic cavity shape is round in shape is almost round, the cavity shape. Now the plane if you see, it extends from the midpoint of posterior surface of the pubic symphysis to second or third sacral vertebrae. So I would like to draw a diagram for this. Just a minute, give me a minute. So if you see the pelvic cavity, it extends from the midpoint of posterior surface. I'll change the pen. Yeah, midpoint of posterior surface of pubic symphysis to the junction of this things that first, second, third. So this is the plane of the pelvic cavity. Okay, this is called as plane of pelvic cavity. So what does that plane of pelvic cavity, where does it start from? This starts from the midpoint of posterior surface of pubic symphysis um, to junction of second and third lumbar vertebrae. Sorry, this is not lumbar, I'm sorry, this is sacrum, right? Sacral vertebrae. Okay, so this is called as the plane of the pelvic cavity. So this plane of pelvic cavity, it is also called as plane of greatest dimensions. It is also called as plane of greatest greatest pelvic dimensions. It is also called as plane of greatest pelvic dimensions, and it is almost round in shape. Now if you see, what is the axis of the pelvic cavity? Axis of the pelvic cavity, as I have said, it is perpendicular. Axis is what is called as axis. So just a minute, I'll just draw this diagram. Just a minute. So what is called as axis of pelvic cavity? We call it as axis of pelvic cavity. That is, if you see, this is the plane of the greatest dimensions, right? So a line axis is a perpendicular line which is drawn to the plane of the pelvic cavity. So it is a mid perpendicular line which is drawn to the uh, plane of the pelvic cavity. So this is plane of pelvic cavity. So this is the axis, mid perpendicular line. So this is axis of pelvic cavity. What is its direction? If you see the direction of this axis of pelvic cavity, it is downwards, almost downwards. Okay, now what are the diameters of this pelvic cavity? We have learned about the axis. Now let us learn about the diameters of the pelvic cavity. The diameters of this pelvic cavity are, as I have said, it's already a rounded structure. So obviously it has an anteroposterior diameter and also the transverse diameter. So what is anteroposterior diameter? Just a minute. So this plane of the pelvis is nothing but the anteroposterior diameter. So this plane of the pelvis, this is equal to the anteroposterior diameter. So this anteroposterior diameter, it starts from the midpoint of second to third sacral vertebrae and it ends in the posterior surface, midpoint of posterior surface of sacral, sorry, symphysis pubis. So this anteroposterior diameter is around 12 centimeters. Okay. Now there is also a transverse diameter of this pelvic inlet. So I don't want to draw the diagram again, but anyways, as I have said, it is a rounded structure. So this anteroposterior diameter which is there, that is here, it is 12 centimeters, and there is transverse diameter. This transverse diameter is also 12 centimeters. Okay, it is really difficult to see the transverse diameter of the pelvic cavity because of the presence of soft tissues and the foramina. Okay, so we cannot precisely measure it. But it is taken as 12 centimeters. Okay, so these are the different diameters of pelvic cavity. So this is about the pelvic cavity, guys. Thank you for watching my lecture. In my next class I will explain about the pelvic outlet. So thank you for watching my lecture. Thank you.